I have a special guest I'm bringing on today that's going to teach us how we can determine stocking density for our homesteads or farms based on the volume of forage in our pasture. The most frequently asked question I get from viewers is, how many sheep can I raise on my property? In the debut video of my Ask Dan series, I featured that very question. I took a stab at answering it. I gave some high-level things to look at, some questions to ask yourself in order to determine stocking density. But today we're going to take a much closer look at how to determine your stocking density so you can have the tools you need to go out in your pasture and be able to say with some level of certainty how many animals you can actually raise. My sheep breeder Tess recently introduced me to a book called Capturing Sunlight: Skills and Ideas for Intensive Grazing, Sustainable Pastures, Healthy Soils, and Grass-Fed Livestock. Not only is this book super information dense about everything grazing, it's written at a level at which the average person can easily understand and digest the information. One particular chapter in the book that really resonated with me was the chapter on determining stocking density based on your dry matter forage in your pasture. So I'm bringing on Dr. Lane to talk to us now about how we go about making these determinations, and then I'm going to put those practices into play. Dr. Lane is a nutritionist and forage specialist with a PhD in animal nutrition from Cornell University. Dr. Lane, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon.
I really wanted to get you on the Grass-Fed Homestead because the number one question I get from viewers in regards to sheep is, how many sheep can I have on my land? And then they'll tell me, how many acres they have. And as you know, and as you point out in your book, there's so many variables that go into answering that, and it's going to change depending on the time of the year, like the season, how much rainfall, and so many things. So it's really difficult to help a viewer in that situation. But could you talk to us about how we go about answering that question? How many animals or how many ruminants can I have?
I'm glad you used the word ruminants. This probably would not work if you have a large herd of guinea pigs. I'm not quite sure about that particular thing. But
Right.
Yeah, it's obviously a basic goal. And every farm is going to be different in whatever ways they're set up. But there's certain basic principles you can bring to the situation. And using those principles, you can do some very, very fair calculations. They're not hard, but when keeping that in mind gives you a framework in which you can actually answer the question. So let me ask a simple question first, based on, everyone has read whatever they can. I'm sure people who are reviewing this, they've picked up extension bulletins and every book they can and whatever they could, and how to manage the pastures. And what do they say? They say, okay, if you got a pasture and whatever the species are, depends where you are on the continent, but they'll say, when do you put your animals in and when do you take them off? And that's a pretty basic question. When do you open the gate and when's it ready to graze, and how quickly do you get them off? And what they'll say is, and we all have seen this, put them on at 8 inches and take them off at 2 inches, which is what everyone does, right?
Right. It's always based on length.
Yeah. And that's the standard recommendation about managing pastures. That's all. It sounds good, but it doesn't work. I'll ask a question. You've got a sheep, you've got a ewe, and that ewe is lambed a month ago, so she's in early lactation, and she's raising twins. Okay, so it's a ewe, whatever that weight is, let's say 160-pound ewe, early lactation and raising twins. All right, and they're going out on spring pasture. My question would be, how many inches of pasture does that ewe need to meet her nutrient requirements?
Right.
And when I ever ask that in a workshop or a class, including a workshop of government agents, there's this blank deer in the headlight look. We don't feed them inches of corn. We feed them pounds of hay or pounds of corn. So we feed them by weight, which is, if you look up the nutrient requirements of the animals, the first thing you have to do is, number one, what animal you're going to feed, and number two, how much are they going to eat? And in that, how much they're going to eat is a package, and then we put all the nutrients in that package. And if a ewe is going to eat 6 pounds in a day, well, all the nutrients that meet her requirements are going to have to be in those 6 pounds. Then why don't we work with pastures the same way? Why don't we work with pastures so that we're dealing how much is out there by weight? And if we know how much is out there by weight, or can take a reasonable guess, then we'll be able to say, okay, if my animals eat a certain amount per every day, and I got so many animals, I can kind of match them.
If we're not measuring on length of the grass or the forage, and we're looking at weight, it's easy to determine the length. You can do that with a measuring tape. How do we determine the weight of forage, the dry matter forage in the pasture?
Well, here's how we teach it. You take a little area and you cut it to the ground, and then you dry it down, and then you get a certain amount of weight, and then you extrapolate. You know how much weight is for that little area, and then you do some arithmetic, and you get how many pounds of dry matter per acre. Because in the end, what we're going to do is you're going to cut to the ground in this, and then you weigh that. Well, anyway, and then you dry it down in a microwave. And then you end up getting an amount of dry matter that's in, because the rest is water and that doesn't have any protein or energy. So until you got the amount of dry matter that's there, and you got the amount of dry matter in this little square thing, and then some arithmetic will give you how much dry matter is per acre. And if you know your animals are going to eat a certain amount of dry matter per day, bingo, you can match them, on a piece of paper with simple arithmetic. But we've learned how to do this in a very clever way. If we do this and get a number, like how much is out there per acre, now I know what that looks like. And so I can do it, and you take pictures of it, and now with our cameras, we got cameras with our phones, take pictures of it, fix that in your mind, and when you get a number, you go, that's what 1,500 pounds looks like on these type of pastures. That's what 3,000 pounds looks like. That's what 200 pounds looks like. And then you can go out in the pasture and take an estimate by just looking at it, which is not unlike putting your hand on the back of a sheep, trying to figure out the body condition score. And the way we do it with this is we don't, to make it real easy, I mean, you can make it a foot by a foot. If you take this thing here, and instead of doing a foot by a foot, do 12 inches by 11.5 inches. If you do that, this has got 138 square inches. If you weigh everything down and you got 7 grams in this 138 square inches, so what you've got is 7 grams per 138 square inches. And now we have to translate that into pounds per acre. But if this is 138 square inches, you do the calculations, and all you have to do is take that number 7 and multiply it by 100, which means all you have to do is add 2 zeros. So by doing this at 12 by 11.5 inches, and then you throw it out there and you cut it down and you dry it down and you get a number, let's say it's 15. Then you've got 1,500 pounds per acre. If you got 22, you got 2,200 pounds per acre.
That's some awesome information from Dr. Lane. Now it's time to put some of that into action. The first thing I need to do is make a square. Last week I finished building a cold smoker box, and I have these wood scraps left over, so I'm going to measure these and see if we have the right dimensions to make the square. We are looking for 12 foot by 11.5. Right here we have 16 inches, another 16 inches, 12 inches, 20 inches. We have definitely the lengths we need here to make the square.
With a shears, one of these, and my tip is get a good one, because if it's not a good one, you will learn various ways of profanity you had no idea you knew. Because you get one that really cuts well, so you don't have to cut it 4 times to get the grass, right? And you cut right to the ground, because you want to know how much is out there.
I have my square built, now I need to go find some grass and get to cutting.
grind this thing down in a microwave, and you put it in your microwave, and you put it for 2 minutes, and you record. You record it, and you weigh it. And what you do is you get a postal scale, simple postal scale, and you go to Bed Bath & Beyond and get one for about $20, $15. That measures to the nearest gram. It's important to get to the nearest gram and not the nearest 5 grams or 10 grams. You need 1 gram. And you know, when you cut the grass, you put them in a bag. You weigh the bag just so you know what your background weight is, right? Then you put the stuff in the bag, and then you dry it down. And then each time you dry it down, you take it some more weight. You take more weight, take it again. Like the first time you dry it for 2 minutes, then 2 minutes, then 1 minute, then 1 minute, 1 minute, and you just measure it. And you might start out with 50 grams, and then it drops down to 30 grams, then 22 grams, then 15 grams, and 14 grams, and eventually 14. Bingo! You know you've gotten all the water out. So you got 14 grams. And then you weighed this first, so you knew that was 7 grams, which in this particular, I've done them enough so I know that this one's about 7 grams.
I have the forage collected here in this bag. I'm now going to dehydrate it in the microwave. I didn't have one of those small brown bags at the time of doing this, so I just used a grocery bag and then cut the excess off. So 1, it would fit in the small microwave I was using, and then 2, just get rid of a lot of that extra weight. I should also note here that from the time I cut the grass to the time I actually did the dehydration of the grass, it was about 12 days later, so the grass had already started drying out a lot during that time. So the difference from my original grass weight to the end weight is less dramatic than the results you might see in your own experiment. Since I changed the weight of the bag by cutting it, I of course had to remove the grass from the bag and get my baseline weight, the tare weight for the bag, which in this case was about 60 grams. When I added the grass back into the bag, we got a total weight of 91 grams. After weighing, I put the bag of grass into the microwave, and per the instructions of the Capturing Sunlight book, I added a small glass of water in there. And also per the instruction of the book, I did the first microwave cycle at 6 minutes. After the 6-minute cycle, I pulled the grass out and weighed it and got a total weight of 87 grams. So we had 4 grams of reduction from water weight. The next microwave cycle was a 3-minute cycle, and it went down to 86 grams. After the 3-minute cycle, I did a series of 2-minute cycles until I got a consistent weight of 83 grams. Of course, we have to subtract the weight of the bag, which was 60 grams, so 83 minus 60 gives us 23 grams of dry matter forage. Okay, so we have 23 grams of dry matter forage. How does that tell us how many animals we can graze? In my interview with Dr. Lane, he's using 7 grams as his example, so he's going to continue explaining how that 7 grams converts to stocking density. But after that, we're going to revisit my numbers and do a calculation for my property.
In this example, if we're using the 7 grams, we're multiplying by 100 and we're given the number 700. So what does that tell us about our pasture? Because we want to leave, in your book, you mentioned, we want a residual. We don't want to scalp the pasture down to the soil. So we want some grass left. And we wanted to put them on the grass, or on, I keep saying grass, what I mean is forage.
Forage, whatever's out there.
And we're putting them on the forage at a certain time. So how does that number 700 translate into that grass growth curve that we're looking for, like where we're starting them, where we're finishing them?
Well, that's the real question. This whole thing of trying to get the idea of how much is there is a preparatory thing. Let's say you have a total mass of 3,000 pounds. You measured that out, and it was like, it was 30 grams, and you multiply it by 100, you get 3,000 pounds per acre. Good. Now, 3,000 pounds an acre is 1.5 tons of stuff out there, and of dry matter. And then the residual, you say, well, how many pounds? Well, on the average, rule of thumb is you want to leave 1,000 pounds, which can translate to 2 or 3 inches, basically. But let's say it's 1,000 pounds. So if you start with 3,000 and you end up with 1,000, the stuff the animals are going to eat is the stuff in the middle. That's 2,000 pounds per acre we're talking about. Okay, so if you have 2,000 pounds, let's do a calculation. That's the amount of material that's out there that I can put my animals on. Now, if they eat 3,000 pounds, they will eat it right to the ground. So the amount that they can eat is what I call the available. We call the available mass. That's the amount that they actually can eat under management. So let's say you had 1 acre has got 2,000 pounds of available mass. That's the amount they can eat. So if you take let's say you have 125 ewes, which is kind of a large size, but some people have it, all right? If you figure a ewe is 160 pounds, and this is an important number. Let's say she eats 5% of her body weight. Now, actually, she eats less than that, but she's going to trample some, okay? She's going to trample some, and she's got a couple of lambs on her. They might eat a little bit. We're not going to worry about those details. We're just going to take a little bit of an extra guess and say 5% of body weight. Now, as people get used to it, 4% will be working. But the principle is exactly the same. And I take 5% because it makes the numbers easier as well. So if they got a 160-pound ewe at 5% of her body weight, that's going to be 8 pounds. That means one ewe is going to eat 8 pounds of dry matter a day. So if you got 125 ewes, they're going to graze 1,000 pounds. 8 times 125 is 1,000. Now we said that pasture has got 2,000 pounds of available grass, from 3,000 to 1,000, so you got 2,000 pounds. So I got my 125 ewes, and they eat 1,000 pounds a day. How many days can they stay out there? 2.
Thank you so much for all that information, Dr. Lane. Now that we have all that information, we're going to apply it here to what's going on in the grass-fed homestead. Earlier, the number we came up with was 2,300 pounds of dry matter forage. We need to leave 1,000 pounds of residual, so that leaves us 1,300 pounds of dry matter forage for grazing. I'm grazing about 2 acres here in the grass-fed homestead, assuming the other acre is similar to the grass I had in the acre from which I did the cutting, and with the average ewe weight of 160 pounds, eating 5% of their body mass daily, that's 8 pounds per ewe. If we take the 1,300 pounds divided by 8 pounds, we get 162.5. So 163 ewes can be grazed on 1 acre for 1 day. So with 2 acres, I can graze 163 ewes for 2 days. Then I'm out of forage, so I've got to hay feed until that grass regrows. That's not smart. That's a lot of ewes to feed and a lot of hay and a lot of money. Here in the grass-fed homestead, we're using regenerative practices. So we're doing a management-intensive grazing program, which is similar in some ways to rotational grazing. In my full-length interview with Dr. Lane, he gets very detailed about the differences between those two programs, but for now, we'll just refer to this as rotational grazing. This is where we're moving the sheep to a new paddock, a small subdivision of that acre each day. The main benefits to this are 1, you get a healthier pasture, and 2, you get healthier animals. So in my circumstances, I don't want the animals coming back, revisiting the first paddock they are on for about 30 days minimum. I like to stretch it out to about 45 days, and of course this depends on the season, but 30 days is my minimum. 45 days is more of my solid average. So across the 2 acres, there's 45 individual little paddocks that the sheep will rotate through. To keep this simple, we'll break it up in the 2 acres, so each acre would have approximately 22.5 paddocks. So we take the 1,300 pounds, divide it by 22.5, and we get 57.77 pounds per paddock. So to determine how many sheep that can support, we're going to divide that by 8, they're 8 pounds a day, and we get 7.22. So my 2 acres can support 7 ewes on a continual grazing cycle through the grazing season. Of course, we have heavy winters here. We're not grazing during the winter, so the property's not supporting anything during that time. This is assuming you're not bringing in any hay. So if you're bringing in hay, of course, you can add more animals to that number, but then you have to ask yourself, should you add more? The hay isn't free, but the grass growing out there naturally is free. That wraps all of this up, guys. I hope this was super helpful for you. With all this information, you should be able to go out on your property, do these calculations, figure out how many ruminant animals your property can support using a rotational grazing or management-intensive grazing system. And again, if you've liked the content in this video, please check out Dr. Lane's book, Capturing Sunlight. I'll leave a link in the video description below. The interview with Dr. Lane was 45 minutes-ish. So I'm going to have a full-length version of that interview coming out very soon on the Grass-Fed Homestead, so check back and you can watch that whole interview.